I'm Lara Marks Baker. I'm an attorney in Denver. I am here at East High School tonight to present about social media and the ways in which kids get in trouble in using it.
I am so happy to be back. Thank you for having me back. As some of you may know, and I talked about this the last time I was here, I started giving a presentation years ago to schools and parents because I was finding in my criminal defense practice that I had way too many really good kids and really good parents charged for one reason or another in the criminal justice system. And so I began this really as sort of a labor of love about a decade ago, and it's just expanded for me. And over time, as the issues change, my practice has changed. And so I really just started doing this as a PSA. Just what should you know as a parent? I'm a parent, it takes a village, and if we can all kind of share some information with each other, it makes it a lot easier. So I'm seeing some nice friendly faces in the audience, so it's nice to see some of you that I've seen before. My role here really is not to tell you how to be a parent. I've always viewed my role here, number one, as a lawyer, just sort of sharing some of my experience with you, and also talking to you about the ways in which your kids can get in trouble so that you as parents don't naively walk your child into a case that they don't need and don't deserve. So this talk is social media. We've done drug talks, I do a whole sex assault unit, and at some point, if any of those issues come up, I'm certainly happy to talk to you. But I wanted to just make this interactive to begin with, since we have a little bit less formal of a format here tonight. And I wanted to just start by asking the parents in the room, how many of you are on Facebook? Okay, most, probably most. How about your kids? How many of your kids are still on Facebook? I'm seeing everybody shake their heads. No, maybe one. Okay, maybe a couple. So over the years, Facebook's become like for moms, right? So it used to be we in the criminal justice system would use Facebook almost exclusively to start doing a profile in a case where it involved kids. Now, Facebook is just not really the issue. So now let me ask you, how many of you are on Instagram? I'm impressed. You guys are sort of a more advanced group than many that I speak to. So it looks like probably 2/3 of this group are on Instagram. Same question about your kids. How many of your kids are on Instagram? Almost everybody's. Okay, now how about Snapchat? How many of you have Snapchat? A lot fewer. So I'm seeing maybe about a quarter of this room are on Snapchat. Same question. How many of your kids are on Snapchat? Everybody. So I wanted to start there because what's so interesting to me, and we're going to talk about some of the studies that the Pew Research Institute has done and some of these other organizations that track social media usage. What happens is parents don't necessarily keep up with the technology that their kids are using, and it becomes frightening because I have always said the use of social media is a little bit like handing your kids keys to a car and letting them drive it with no supervision. Why? Because almost every criminal case that I have involves in some fashion a juvenile's cell phone, their social media account, or if it didn't involve it to begin with, it involves it as the case moves on. Why? Because kids today put everything on social media. And if it's not on social media, it is on their phone, and they think that they're Snapchatting or snapping or whatever they call it, right? And that all of that is in some fashion disappearing, that it isn't memorializing what they're doing. That just simply isn't the case. So I'm going to talk to you a bit about Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat. I'm going to talk about Vine, which is no longer really an issue, the Vault, which is still an issue. Let me ask by a show of hands, has anybody heard of the Vault? Seeing a lot of shaking heads, maybe one or two. Okay, we're going to talk about what is the Vault, how are kids using the Vault, and what do you need to know about it. I am not technology, I'm not good at technology. I will sort of give you that disclaimer. I went to law school, so I didn't have to do stuff on technology. But I am happy to talk to you about, there are different programs that your service providers can get you connected with on your cell phone so that you can start monitoring the way your kids are using their cell phones and social media. So I want to just start, and you'll forgive me for looking at numbers on my list here. I sometimes use a PowerPoint, but I want to just give you some numbers that I think are really interesting when you're talking about social media with kids. So these numbers were a result of a study that the Pew Research Institute came out with, I think, in 2015. And their study says that in 2015, 24% of teens go online almost constantly. 92% of teens report going online daily. The typical teen sends an average of 60 messages in a day. So that doesn't sound so overwhelming, but this is where the numbers, I think, get really interesting. When we talk about digital media and the time that kids spend on digital media every single day, kids spend, and when I talk about kids, I think their study talked about 18 and under, 9 hours a day. 9 hours a day. 9 hours a day. Kids are using social media or digital media. What does that mean? Their average number of hours sleeping is 7 hours. They are in school 6.8 hours a day. They exercise perhaps an hour a day. What does that mean? They are using digital media more than they are sleeping, they're going to school, they're exercising, or they're doing anything else. So when I talk to parents about, I think you better be monitoring what's going on with your kids and their devices, there's a reason why. 9 hours a day, they are attached to them. And I'm sure you as parents know that anecdotally, right? Because you see your kids who never take their faces out of their phones or off their tablets. Now you know what the numbers support. And this was almost 4 years ago that this study was done. That time online amounts to 63 hours a week and a total of 136 days of the year that your kids are attached to digital media. So they've broken down the devices that they're using. Smartphones account for almost 3 hours a day, and the computer accounts for about an hour a day, and then it breaks down into different things like television, iPods, and video game consoles and the like. So the next question I have, and I wanted to kind of have the lights on so we could talk about this, now that I have a sense of where you are online and where your kids are online, the question becomes, how many of you are monitoring what's going on online? I'm seeing like this, like 4 or 5 people saying, kind of. So let me take you back to the Pew Research Institute study. Their study says that about 61% of parents checked the websites which their kids are visiting. What does that mean in the inverse? 40% of parents have absolutely no idea what their kids are doing online. Why does that matter? Well, think about how I started this presentation. I, as a criminal defense lawyer, have almost no cases that don't involve, let me say that in a more grammatically appropriate way, almost every case I have in some fashion either involves a cell phone or social media in some way. And so kids are finding themselves in the legal system because they are misusing their phones, they are misusing social media, and how? So let's talk about some of the ways that that happens and how you as a parent can be watching out for it. So the kinds of cases, the classifications of cases that we see range from big to small. We've all heard about cyberbullying and the issues that come up with cyberbullying. And we can talk about that sort of at a high level. I can also break it down for you in terms of what I actually see and how that's charged. The most frequent cases that I see are cases involving a cell phone where a child is sexting meaning sending some sexually explicit message on their phone, drug dealing, back and forth on Snapchat, or some form of harassment through electronic means. So I will talk about those 3 types of crimes because I think parents have in their mind, well, you know, my kid isn't committing a sex offense. My kid doesn't do that stuff. My kid isn't harassing people. We'll talk about the statutes and what the statutes define as sort of legal violations. But your kids, if they haven't done it yet, I am telling you the likelihood is pretty great that if you are not helping guide their use of their cell phones, they are quite likely to be doing something that if somebody found out about it would run them afoul of the law. And we'll talk about Snapchat and we'll talk about Instagram. But well, let me come back to Instagram and Snapchat before I sort of move on to the legal issues. How many of you have heard the term Finsta when we're talking about Instagram? Finsta. You've heard that? Do you have any sense of what Finsta means?
I looked it up once to see what it meant, but now I can't remember what.
I'm going to see, do we have any kids in the room? Oh, I'm sorry. Can I pick on you? Do you mind if I pick on you? You're the only kid in the room, and thank you for being here. Do you know what the term Finsta means? Good. Yay. So I'm going to blow up the game a little bit. I always tell kids when I'm giving this presentation, I'm going to blow up your game, and I'm sorry about it, but you as parents should know what Finsta means. It means fake Instagram. And most kids, and you are sort of a wonderful exception, most kids know what Finsta means and Rinsta means. What is Rinsta? Real. So what happens when parents start monitoring their kids' Instagram account? Kids have become smart enough to know, let me set up a profile where I have my arm around my teacher and my straight A certificate and make that the one that I tell my parents that I have. And now let me set up my Finsta account, and that's where the real business goes down. So when you as parents are monitoring, and I am telling you, I'm guessing, and this is pure speculation, my guess is 70% of kids that I see have a Finsta account and a Rinsta account. Because that's how they are communicating with each other in a way that they know their parents are not accessing. Because their parents are busy over here on their Rinsta account thinking they're doing good parenting, and all the dirty work is going down on the Finsta account. Now let me ask this question moving to Snapchat. How many of you have a sense for how Snapchat works? I think most people, right? Snapchat is this little bit of like a Mission Impossible kind of theme, right? You send a message and within a few seconds it automatically deletes itself. Is that sort of the kind of thing that you think about? Almost every kid that I have in these presentations, and Bernie is right, I do at least once a month, if not more, and I do them to high schools, whole auditoriums full of high schools, and I ask these kinds of questions. And every time I ask a question about Snapchat, I say to kids, how many of you think Snapchat deletes off your phone? And about 90% of them raise their hand and say, it disappears. I am here to tell you, Snapchat does not disappear off your phone. So all of these kids who have a sense that, well, I can deal my marijuana on Snapchat. You bring the Visine and I'll bring the weed and I'll meet you behind the school and nobody's ever going to know because this message is going to implode, just simply isn't the case. More frequently, what we see with Snapchat are these sexting messages. We're going to talk about sexting. It is a sex offense. It is a frightening, scary sex offense, and probably 80% of the kids that I talk to in high schools have either sent or received a sext message. And we aren't just talking about DPS, we're talking about Cherry Creek schools and Douglas County schools. It is rampant. They send these messages and they think they're destroyed. So one of my pieces of advice to parents is, number one, Snapchat is an application designed to hide stuff from you. That's the whole purpose of Snapchat. So I get asked all the time, when is it appropriate for me to allow my child to use Snapchat on their cell phones? And my answer almost always is, number one, if your kids have a smartphone, don't let them have Snapchat. I hear from parents, wait a second, you are stunting their social growth. That's how kids talk to each other. If they don't have Snapchat, they are being left out of the social community that they want to be a part of. You got to kind of address that as a parent, but Snapchat, but for the emojis and kind of the fun things that you can do with Snapchat, has a singular purpose, and that is to hide things from you. Snapchat doesn't delete. So if your kids are using it and you have no idea both what your kids are sending and what they may be receiving, you don't have control over Snapchat, nor do you have control over what your kid might get into trouble with. So let me give you an example of the ways kids get in trouble with Snapchat. In 1 week in my practice, I had 2 cases come in. One was with a young woman and her family, and their daughter had sent an image of herself to a boy she was dating. It was an explicit image. They thought they were dating. They broke up. The young man sent the image to the entire baseball team at the high school. He thought it was gone because he had sent it via Snapchat. Somebody can certainly screenshot it, right? And that happens. The other thing that happens is that police have this really cool device. It's called Cellbrite. And most of the time, when they become aware that there are these messages that are going out via Snapchat, if they can get to them quickly enough, chances are they can recover them pretty quickly. And what happens? In this scenario with this young woman, her parents were in my office saying, oh my gosh, what should we do? Our daughter has been victimized, and there are now images out there all over the place that she can't get back. And it's tragic. And I will tell you, in the year that I've had that case, I've seen it come around twice. I've seen kids get access to her images at other schools because it was sent out to everybody. So on the one hand, Snapchat is the kind of thing that can victimize children if they aren't using it properly. And on the other hand, in the very same week, I had a young man come into my practice with his parents. And I don't mean this in any way that gender couldn't be reversed, but in this case it was the young woman victimized and the young man who was being accused of doing the wrong thing. He had gotten some images from a girl and sent them out to a number of friends. And his parents, because think about your phones. How many of your kids have the phones in their own names? Not in their names, they're in your names, right? And so the parents had taken his phone back. They had like a 9 p.m. curfew. Mom and dad were both, one was a physician and one was, I think, a teacher, which makes it relevant because they were both mandatory reporters. They had taken the phone at 9 o'clock, and the father is getting ready for bed, and suddenly on the phone pops up an image of a young woman underage. Now, child pornography in Colorado is a strict liability offense. It does not matter. You are never justified for ever having an image like that on your phone for any reason. There's no justification. Problem is now the dad is sitting in my office saying, I am a physician. My son elicited those messages via Snapchat. She sent those explicit images via Snapchat. The phone is in my name. He has been contacted by law enforcement. What is my obligation? When I tell you it was a crazy mess, it was a crazy mess. Because I had to get the dad a second lawyer. The dad had his own legal concerns about whether or not he had to make the mandatory report, and I had to defend the kid who had a police officer knocking on the door to say, why are you in possession of child pornography? Which, by the way, is a felony offense. So, yes.
Are those two girls who sent those pictures also a criminal? I mean, in this case, too.
They have exposure. They have criminal exposure. When you send an explicit image, whether it's of yourself or anybody else, if you are under the age of 18 or the image is a picture of somebody under the age of 18, you have distributed child pornography. It is a Class 3 felony. So if you receive it, you are in possession of it, which is a felony sex offense. And if you send it on, even if it's yourself, you are committing a felony offense. So the young woman's family, the first story that I told you, was concerned about, can we go to the school and talk to the school about the fact that she sent this out and have the school help us try to get it back? And my advice to her had to be, if you tell the school they are mandatory reporters, they will be obligated to take it to the police. Now, more often than not, what I'm seeing anecdotally is that police are trying to be reasonable about who they prosecute and who they don't. But as a technical matter, they could charge her as well. So, why is Snapchat sort of the focus of my discussions in these presentations? Because they're not sending these messages via text message. They're not generally doing it on Instagram. They're sending it via Snapchat, with the theory that nobody will ever be able to gain access to them. And if you hear nothing else that I say to you tonight, Snapchat can and often is recoverable. And it becomes a really scary thing. It's not just sex offenses that I worry about, drug deals as well, and anything that can be used to monitor. So Snapchat is the kind of thing that can create extraordinary liability for you and for your kid. Let's talk about the vault, because the vault is often used on the backside of Snapchat. So what happens? The vault is an application that you put on your phone that looks like a game, a calculator, something innocuous. You put in a password to this application, and behind it, your kids can store images. They can store images of all kinds of things. Sexting kinds of images, which I often see. I had a case 2 years ago where kids had been videotaping fights. So kids on their Finsta accounts were sort of bullying each other and egging each other on, and then they would all go to a park and video record the fight that sort of ensued between, in this case, they were young women, and then they would put all these videos in the vault. And they thought that their parents and perhaps law enforcement or their teachers would be none the wiser. And so they were able to store all of this stuff and effectively torture each other with it, because they had now all these images that they were keeping there. There are a million other things that they could keep in the vault, but I am surprised every time I sort of talk about the vault and parents have no idea, because I guarantee if you go home and say to your kids, ever heard of the vault? They might look at you like, how'd you know about the vault? So again, this presentation is meant to sort of educate you, to blow up their game so you can protect them in looking at their phone. There are all kinds of other things that go on social media, and frankly, it's hard even for me, and I do this all day, to keep up with them. The one other thing I want to talk to you about is the dark net. How many of you have heard of the dark net? I'm seeing more and more people. So every time I do these talks, I just try to kind of storytell, because I think so often people think, well, this isn't going to happen to my kid. My kid's the good kid. My kid does all the right things. He or she's got straight A's or whatever it is. So many of these social media platforms can get your kids in trouble. It can also victimize them. So you've probably heard the stories about how and where the dark net has preyed on kids. But I had this scenario come in a few years ago. So I had a young man who was having a tough time in school and made some comment on his Instagram account that it would be better if the school just blew up. And of course, the school took that quite seriously. They suspended him. His family brought him to me to deal with the school disciplinary issues and the law enforcement investigation related to what they deemed to be a threat against the school. In the course of that, the father started telling me, I think somebody hacked his account. Not my kid. I don't think my kid would have done something like that. That's just not something he would have said. So we took the cell phone and we did a forensic examination on the cell phone, which is the way lawyers and law enforcement get to the guts of what's on the phone. And what we were able to discover that this kid was not sharing is that he had been accessing the darknet for a number of things. He had been purchasing steroids from China via the darknet. For those of you who don't know, the darknet is like an encrypted internet. So once you find your way into the darknet, you can do all kinds of things that you wouldn't otherwise be able to do on the normal internet. And I'm not going to stand here and tell you I know how it works, but it is an encrypted internet that often, sort of overseas people are using to commit different crimes. But what we discovered is that this young man had gotten involved in some sex trafficking kinds of discussions with people in Asia. And he had been preyed upon for months and months by a group in Asia through the use of the darknet. So why am I telling you? I'm sure I've scared you now, right? You're like, great, okay, there are all these terrible threats to my children in using the phones. Let me come back to my original point, which is when I asked all of you, how many of you are monitoring what's going on your kids' phones? I didn't see a single hand raise definitively. If I missed it, I'm sorry, but mainly what I saw is this. So there are cases big and cases small that your kids can become involved in without having any concept of the misuse of their phone or social media, and you would have no way of helping them, guiding them, or understanding whether they're being victimized or they are preying upon somebody, whether intentionally or inadvertently, and it could walk you into a very serious mess. So I don't know how much longer. I've kind of gone for, I think, about 40 minutes. I'm certainly happy to keep talking. There's a lot that I can share. Before I stop, there's one other category of crime that I see almost as frequently as anything else, which is the crime of harassment through the use of cell phones. So our state statutes define harassment. It's a misdemeanor offense. Kids, and I think I talked about this in our last talk, kids are subject to the same code, the same criminal code that adults are. It's just that the juvenile justice system deals with it slightly differently. So harassment is considered to be a misdemeanor offense. It is a very broad statute. What it says is, if that you send an electronic communication of any kind, if it has obscene language, if it is intended to annoy, intimidate, harass, or threaten another person, you have committed the misdemeanor offense of harassment. Well, think about that. If you send a message that annoyed another person, you have committed the crime of harassment. Now let's talk about domestic violence. We all, I guarantee those of you who don't work in the criminal justice system think of domestic violence as one spouse pounding on another. Let me disabuse you of that notion. Domestic violence includes any act or crime of violence against an intimate partner. Intimate partner does not mean you have to be married. It does not mean you have to have a sexual relationship with them. It means you are in some form of romantic relationship with them. So why am I telling you this? Because so frequently, and let me just tell you the anecdote. I had a kid about 5 years ago who was dating a little girl. He was 18 years old, and she was his first girlfriend. And she broke up with him, and his heart was broken. And he was sending her text messages. And his first text message said to her, "I'd like to talk to you." She ignored it. He sends another one, "I'd really like to talk to you." She's ignoring him. Over the course of the afternoon, his text messages became more insistent, until finally this young woman is sitting at the table with her parents eating dinner, and her phone is blowing up. And her parents finally say, "What on earth is going on?" And she shows them the phone, and lo and behold, the last message that he had sent to her phone was, "If you don't answer my text messages, I'm going to come to your house and go Chris Brown on you." Now, for those of us who are old enough to remember Chris Brown and Rihanna, the allegation was that he beat her up terribly, right? And so when the parents see this message come through on the kid's cell phone, what do? What we all would have done. They call the police and they say, "Listen, we understand this kid is heartbroken. We don't think he's really on his way over here. We can't take that risk. We want you to get involved." So what do the police do? Well, first of all, this kid was 18. Many of you have seniors who are already 18. If not, they will be soon. He is no longer a juvenile in the justice system. Domestic violence requires an automatic arrest. So he didn't go to the Gilliam Center, or in this case, the Foot Center in Arapahoe County. He went to Big Boy Jail. And the police came into his parents' home at about 10 o'clock at night. They would not answer a single question for the parents. He was 18 years old. They took him out of his bed and took him to the Big Boy Jail, where he spent the next 4 days. And then he was charged with what? A misdemeanor domestic violence offense. Why? Because the communications that he had sent electronically through his cellular telephone fit the description of harassment with a component of domestic violence. And when you look at how frequently your kids are using their phones to send messages, that could just as easily happen on Instagram, on Snapchat, text message, email, whatever it is. And that was the scenario in that case. Now, I've seen cases with sort of less significant fact patterns be charged as harassment, but that's the anecdote that I think gets people's attention in terms of, you can see how it happened. You can see where a family might say, "Domestic violence? Are you kidding? He texted her too many times. He said something that wasn't nice." Okay, he didn't mean it. We ended up, here's the last thing I will say about social media and cell phones. It's black and white. I'm sure you tell your kids this, right? Once you put it on the internet, it's an ink. And so when law enforcement comes looking for it, when you go to a lawyer, it's hard for me at that point to undo what you've put in ink. At that point is me begging and pleading with a prosecutor to not do something that is going to impact the rest of your kids' lives. So go to your service providers, whomever they may be, with your cell phones. There are all kinds of programs that you can use to monitor your kids. And I get asked in every one of these, well, should I really be invading my kids' privacy like this? That is a parental decision you have to make for yourself. I will tell you, my poor children, they will not have much privacy. Because I would rather, again, it's not that I don't trust you. It's that anybody can access you through these mediums that I have no control over. And never mind the juvenile justice system. Now, this is me as a mom talking. Never mind sort of getting in trouble in the juvenile justice system. How can I emotionally help you through some of the things that kids go through if I don't know what it is that you're dealing with and it is constantly coming at you 24 hours a day? So with that, I will stop talking. I think I've done 45 minutes. I'm happy to answer any questions.